Section 10 of Astounding Stories 16, 1931.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mike Harris. Astounding Stories 16, April 1931, by Various. Hell's Dimension, by Tom Curry. Part 2. A terrible greenish-blue light suddenly illuminated the laboratory, and through the air came sound vibrations, which seemed to tear at Phillips's body. He found himself on the floor, knocked from his chair, and he writhed this way and that, speechless, suffering a torment of agony. His whole flesh seemed to tremble in unison with the waves, which emanated from the machines which Lambert manipulated. After what seemed hours to the suffering sleuth, the force diminished, and soon Phillips was able to rise. Trembling, the detective cursed and yelled for help in a high-pitched voice. Lambert had thrown back his hood and was rocking to and fro in agony.
Madge,
he cried.
What have I done? Come back to me. Come back!
Doherty and the others came running in at their chief's shouts. Arrest him, ordered Phillips shakily. I've stood enough of this nonsense. The detective started for Lambert. He saw them coming, and swiftly threw off the protective garments he wore.
Stand back,
he cried, and threw the switch all the way over. The verditer green light smashed through the air, and the queer sound sensation smacked and tore them. Doherty, who had drawn a revolver when he was answering Phillips's cries, fired the gun into the air, and the report seemed to battle with the vibrating ether. Lambert, as he threw the switch, leaped forward and landed on the metal plate under the ceiling studs, in the very centre of the awful disturbance, and unprotected from its force. For a few moments Lambert felt racking pain, as though something were tearing at his flesh, separating the very atoms. The scientist saw the wriggling figures of the sleuths in various strange positions, but his impressions were confused. His head whirled round and round, and he swayed to and fro, and finally he thought he fell down, or rather that he had melted, as a lump of sugar dissolves in water. He's gone. Gone. In the heart of nothingness was Lambert, his body torn and racked in a shrieking chaos of sound and a blinding glare of iridescent light which seemed too much to bear. His last conscious thought was a prayer that, having failed to bring back his sweetheart, Madge Crawford, he was undergoing a step towards the same destination to which he had sent her. John Lambert came to with a shudder, but it was not a mortal shudder. He could sense no body, had no sense of being confined by matter. He was in a strange, chilly place, a twilight region, limitless, without dimensions. Yet he could feel something, in an impersonal way, vaguely indifferent. He had no pain now. He was moving, somehow. He had one impelling desire, and that was to discover Madge Crawford. Perhaps it was this thought which directed his movements. Intent upon finding the girl, if she was indeed in this same strange world that he was, he did not notice for some time, how long he had no way of telling, that there were other beings which tried to impede his progress. But as he grew more accustomed to the unfamiliar sensations he was undergoing, he found his path blocked again and again by queer beings. They were living, without doubt, and had intelligence, and evinced hostility towards him. But they were shapeless as amoebas. He heard them in a sort of soundless whisper, and could see them without the use of his eyes. And he shuddered, though he could feel no body in which he might be confined. Still, when he pinched viciously with invisible fingers at the spot where his face should have been, a twinge of pain registered on the vague consciousness, which appeared to be all there was to him. He was not sure of his substance, though he could evidently experience human sensations with his amorphous body. He did not know whether he could see. yet he was dodging this way and that as the beings who occupied this world tried to stop him. They gave him the impression of grey shapes, and in coppery shadows things gleamed and closed in on him. He seemed to hear a cry, and he knew that he was receiving a call for help from Madge Crawford. He tried to run, pushed determinedly towards the spot, impelled by his love for the girl. Now, as he hurried, he occasionally was stopped short by collision with the formless shapes which were all about him. He was hampered by them, for they followed him, making a sound like wind heard in a dream. Whatever medium he was in was evidently thickly inhabited by the hostile beings, who claimed this world as their own. Though he could not actually feel the medium, he could sense it was heavy. He leapt and ran, fighting his way through the increasing hosts, and the roar of their voice impressions increased in his consciousness. Yet there seemed to be nothing tangible save vagueness. He felt he was in a blind spot in space, a place of no dimensions, no time, where beings are bored by nature, things which had never developed any dimensional laws, existed. The cry for help struck him, with more force this time. Lambert, whatever form he was in, realised that he was close to the end of his journey to Madge Crawford. He tried to speak, and had the impression that he said something reassuring. He then bumped into some vibrational being which he knew was Madge. His ears could not hear, nor could his flesh feel, but his whole form or cerebrum sensed he held the woman he loved in his arms. And she was speaking to him, in accents of fear, begging him to save her. John, you've come at last. They have been torturing me terribly. Save me.
Darling Madge, I will do everything I can. Now I have found you, and we are together, and will never part. Can you hear me?
I know what you are thinking, and what you wish to say. I can't exactly hear. It all seems vague and impossible. Yet I can suffer. They've been hitting me with something that makes me shudder and shake. There, they are at it again. Lambert felt the sensations now, which the girl had made known to him. He felt crowded by grey beings, and his existence was troubled by spasms of pain impressions. He knew Madge was crying out too. He could not comprehend the attacks or guess their meaning, but the situation was unendurable. Anger shook him, and he began to fight furiously but vaguely. They were closely hemmed in, but when Lambert began to strike out with hands and legs, the beings gave way a little. The scientist tried to shout, and though he could actually hear nothing, the result was gratifying. The formless creatures seemed to scatter and draw back in confusion as he yelled his defiance. They hate that, Madge said to him. I have screamed myself hoarse, and that is why they have not killed me, if I can be killed.
I do not believe we can, but they can torture us,
replied Lambert.
It is an everlasting half-life or quarter-life, and these creatures who call this hell's dimension home have nothing but hatred for us in their consciousness.
The inhabitants of the imperfect world had closed in once again, and the sharp instruments of torture they used were being thrust into the invisible bodies of the two humans. Each time Lambert was unable to restrain his cries, for it seemed that he was being torn to pieces by vibrations. He yelled until he could not speak above a whisper, or at least until the impressions of the speech he gave forth did not trouble the beings. The two humans, still bound to some extent by their mortal beliefs, were chivied to and fro, and struck and bullied. The creatures seemed to delight in this sport. The two felt they could not die, yet they could suffer terribly. Would this go on through eternity? Was there no release? They were trying to tear Madge away from him. She was fighting them, and Lambert, in a frenzy of rage, made a determined effort to get away with the girl from their tormentors. They retreated before his onslaughts. Drawing Madge after him, Lambert put down his head, or believed he was doing so, and ran as fast as he could at the beings. He bumped into some invisible forms, and was slowed in his rush, but he shouted and flailed about with his arms, and tried to kick. Madge helped by screaming and striking out. They made some distance in this way, or so they thought, and the horrid creatures gave way before them. All about them was the coppery sensation of the medium in which they moved. Lambert, as he became more used to the form he was inhabiting, he began to think he could discern dreadful eyes which stared unblinkingly at the couple. He fought on, and believed they had come to a spot where the beings did not molest them, though they still sensed the things glaring at them. Were they on some invisible eminence, above the reach of these queer creatures?
We might as well stop here, for if we try to go farther, we may come to a worse place,
said Lambert. They rested there, in temporary peace, together at last. I seem to be happy now, said Madge, clinging close. I feared I would never see you again, John dear. I ran to you when you called out that day, and when I crossed the plate, I was torn and racked and knocked down. When I next experienced sensation, it was in this terrible form. I am becoming more used to it, but I kept crying out for you. The beings, as soon as they discovered my presence, began to torment me. More and more have been collecting, and I have a sensation of seeing them as horrible, revolting beasts. Oh, John, I don't think I could have stood it much longer if you hadn't come to me. They were driving me on, ceaselessly torturing me.
Curse them,
said Lambert.
I wish I could really get hold of some of them. Perhaps, Madge, I will be able to think of some escape for us from this hell's dimension.
Yes, darling. I could not bear to think that we are eternally damned to exist among these beings, hurt by them and unable to get away. How I wish we were back in the laboratory, at the tea table. How happy we were there.
And we will be again, Madge.
Lambert was far from feeling hopeful, but he tried to encourage the girl into thinking they might get away. However, he was unable to dissimulate. She felt his anguish for her safety. But I know now that you love me. I can feel it stronger than ever before, John. It seems like a great rock to which I can always cling, your love. It protects me from the hatred that these beasts pour out against us. Since they had no sense of time, they could not tell how long they were allowed to remain unmolested. But in each other's company they were happy, though each one was afraid for the safety of the loved one. They spoke of the mortal life they had lived, and their love. They felt no need of food or water, but clung together in a dimensionless universe held up by love. The lull came to an end at last. There was no change in the coppery vagueness about them, which they sensed as the surrounding ether, but all was changeless, boundless. Lambert, close to Madge Crawford, felt that they were about to be attacked. He had swift, temporary impressions of seeing saucer-like, unblinking eyes, and then hordes of bizarre inhabitants started to climb up to their perch. For a short while Lambert and Madge fought them off, thrusting at them, seeming to push them backward down the intangible slope. The cries which the dematerialized humans uttered also helped to hold the leaders of the attacking army partially in check, but the vast number of beings swept forward. The thrusts of the torture fields they emanated became more and more racking, as the two unfortunates shuddered in horror and pain. The power to demonstrate loud noise was evidently impossible to these creatures, for their only sounds came to Madge Crawford and John Lambert as long, drawn-out, almost unbearable squeaks, mouse-like in character. Perhaps they never had the faculty of speech, since they did not need to communicate with one another. Perhaps they realized that the racket that they could make would hurt them as much as it did their enemies. Lambert, Madge clinging to him, was forced backwards down the slope, and the beings had the advantage of height. He could not again reach the eminence, but the way behind seemed to clear quickly enough, though thrusts were made at him innumerable times with the torture fields. The hordes pushed them backward, and ever back. They were forced on for some distance. As they retreated, the way became easier, and fewer of the beings impeded the channel along which they moved, though in front of them, and on all sides, above, beneath, they were pressed by the hordes.
They are forcing us to some place they want us to go,
said Lambert desperately. "We can do nothing more," replied the girl. Lambert felt her quiet confidence in him, and that as long as they were together, all was well.
"Maybe they can kill us, somehow,"
he said. And now Lambert felt the way was clear to the rear. There was a sudden rush of the creatures, and needle-like fields were impelled viciously into the spaces the two humans occupied. Madge cried out in pain, and Lambert shouted. The throng drew away from them as suddenly as it had surged forward, and an instant later the pair, clinging together, felt that they were falling.
"Are you all right, Madge?"
"Yes, John." But he knew she was suffering. How long they fell he did not know, but they stopped at last. No sooner had they come to rest than they were assailed with senses of pain which made both cry out in anguish. There, in the spot where they had been thrust by the hordes, they felt that there was some terrific vibration which racked and tore at their invisible forms continuously, sending them into spasms of sharp misery. They were both forced to give vent to their feelings by loud cries, but they could not command their movements any longer. When they tried to get away, their limbs moved, but they felt that they remained in the same spot.
The pain shook every fraction of their souls. We are in some pit of hell into which they have thrown us, John," gasped Madge. He knew she was shivering with the torture of the great vibration from which there was no escape, that they were in a prison pit of hell's dimension. Oh, John, I'm dying." But he was powerless to help her. He suffered as much as she, yet there was no weakening of his sensations. He was in as much torture as he had been at the start. He knew that they could not die, and could never escape from this misery of hell. Their cries seemed to disturb the vacuum about. Lambert, shivering and shaking with pain, was aware that great eyes, similar to those which they had thought they saw above, were now upon them. Squeaks were impressed upon him, squeaks which expressed disapprobation. There were some of the beings in the pit with them. Madge knew they were there too. She cried out in terror. "Will they add to our misery?" But the creatures in the vacuum were pinned to the spots they occupied, as were Madge and Lambert. From their squeaks it was evident that they suffered too, and were fellow prisoners of the mortals. "Probably the cries we make disturb them," said Lambert. "Vibrations to which we and they are not attuned are torture to the form we are in. Evidently the inhabitants of this hell world punish offenders by condemning them to this eternal torture. Why? Why do they treat us so?" "Perhaps we jarred upon them, hurt them, because we were not of their kind exactly," said Lambert. "Perhaps it was just their natural hatred of us as strangers." They did not grow used to the terrible eternity of torments. No, if anything, it grew worse as it went on. Still they could visualize no end to the existence to which they were bound. Throbs of awful intensity rent them, tore them apart myriad times. Yet they still felt as keenly as before, and suffered just as much. There was no death for them, no release from the intangible world in which they were. Their fellow prisoners squeaked at them, as though imploring them not to add to the agony by uttering discordant cries. But it was impossible for Madge to keep quiet, and Lambert shouted in anguish from time to time. There seemed no end to it. And yet, after what was eternity to the sufferers, Madge spoke hopefully. "Darling John, I fear I am going to die. I am growing weaker. I can feel the pain very little now. It is all vague, and is getting less real to me. Goodbye, sweetheart. I love you, and I always will." Lambert uttered a strangled cry. "No, no! Don't leave me, Madge!" He clung to her. Yet she was becoming extremely intangible to him. She was melting away from his embrace, and Lambert felt that he, too, was weaker, even less real than he had been. He hoped that if it was the end, they would go together. Desperately, he tried to hold her with him, but he had little ability to do so. The torture was racking his consciousness, but was becoming more dreamlike. There was a terrific snap, suddenly, and Lambert lost all consciousness. "Water! Water!" Lambert, opening his eyes, felt his body writhing about and experienced pain that was mortal. A bluish-green light dazzled his pupils and made him blink. Something cut into his flesh, and Lambert rolled about trying to escape. He bumped into something soft. He clung to this form, and knew that he was holding on to a human being. Then the light died out, and in its stead was the yellow, normal glow of electric lights. Weak, famished, and almost dead of thirst, Lambert looked about him at the familiar sights of his laboratory. He was lying on the floor, close by the metal plate, and at his side, unconscious, but still alive to judge by her rising and falling breast, was Madge Crawford. Someone bent over him and pressed a glass of water against his lips. He drank, watching while a mortal who Lambert at last realised was Detective Phillips bathed Madge Crawford's temples with water from a pitcher and forced a little between her pale, drawn lips. Lambert tried to rise, but he was weak and required assistance. He was dazed still, and they sat him down in a chair and allowed him to come to. He shuddered from time to time, for he still thought he could feel the torture which he had been undergoing. But he was worried about Madge, and watched anxiously as Phillips, assisted by another man, worked over the girl. At last, Madge stirred and moaned faintly. They lifted her to the bench, where they gently restored her to full consciousness. When she could sit up, she at once cried out for Lambert. The scientist had recovered enough to rise to his feet and staggered towards her. "Here I am, darling," he said. "John, we're alive. We're back in the laboratory." "Ah, Lambert, glad to see you." A heavy voice spoke, and Lambert for the first time noticed the black-clad figure which stood to one side near the switchboard, hidden by a large piece of apparatus. "Dr. Morgan!" cried Lambert. Althouse Morgan, the renowned physicist, came forward calmly with an outstretched hand. "So, you realized your great ambition, eh?" he said curiously. "But where would you be if I had not been able to bring you back?" "In hell, or hell's dimension, anyway," said Lambert. He went to Madge, took her in his arms. "Darling, we are safe. Morgan has managed to rematerialize us. We will never again be cast into the void in this way. I shall destroy the apparatus and my notes." Doherty, who had been out of the room on some errand, came into the laboratory. He shouted when he saw Lambert standing before him. "So you got him!" he cried. "Where was he hiding?" His eyes fell upon Madge Crawford then, and he exclaimed in satisfaction, "You found her, eh?"
"No,"
said Phillips.
"They came back. They suddenly appeared out of nothing, Doherty."
"Don't kid me," growled Doherty. "They were hiding in a closet somewhere. Maybe they can fool you guys, but not me." Lambert spoke to Phillips. "I'm starving to death, and I think Miss Crawford must be too. Will you tell Felix to bring us some food, plenty of it?" One of the sleuths went to the kitchen to give the order. Lambert turned to Morgan. "How did you manage to bring us back?" he asked. Morgan shrugged. "It was all guesswork at the last. I at first could check the apparatus by your notes, and this took some time. You know you have written me in detail about what you were working on, so when I was summoned by Detective Phillips, who said you had mentioned my name to him as the only one who could help, I could make a good conjecture as to what had occurred. I heard the stories of all concerned, and realized that you must have dematerialized Miss Crawford by mistake, and then, unable to bring her back, had followed her yourself. I put on your insulation outfit and went to work. I have not left here for a moment, but have snatched an hour or two of sleep from time to time. Detective Phillips has been very good and helpful. Finally, I had everything in shape, but I reversed the apparatus in vital spots, and tried each combination until suddenly, a few minutes ago, you were rematerialized. It was a desperate chance, but I was forced to take it in an endeavour to save you." Lambert held out his hand to his friend. "I can never thank you enough," he said gratefully. "You saved us from a horrible fate. But you speak as though we had been gone a long while. Was it many hours?" "Hours?" repeated Morgan, his lips parting under his black beard. "Man, it was 8 days. You've been gone since a week ago last night." Lambert turned to Phillips. "I must ask you not to release this story to the newspapers," he begged. Phillips smiled and turned up his hands in a gesture of frank wonder.
"Professor Lambert," he said, "I can't believe what I have seen myself. If I told such a yarn to the reporters, they'd never forget it. They'd kid me out of the department."
"Ah, they were hiding in a closet," growled Doherty. "Come on, we've wasted too much time on this job already. Just a couple of nuts, says I." The sleuths, after Phillips had shaken hands with Lambert, left the laboratory. Morgan, a large man of middle age, joined them in a meal, which Felix served to the three on a folding table brought in for the purpose. Felix was terribly glad to see Madge and Lambert again, and manifested his joy by many bobs and leaps as he waited upon them. A grin spread across his face from ear to ear. Morgan asked innumerable questions. They described as best they could what they could recall of the strange dominion in which they had been, and the physicist listened intently. "It is some hell's dimension, as you call it," he said at last. "Where it is, or exactly what, I cannot say," said Lambert. "I surely have no desire to return to that world of hate." Madge, happy now, smiled at him, and he leaned over and kissed her tenderly. "We have come from hell together," said Lambert, "and now we are in heaven." End of Part 2, and end of Hell's Dimension by Tom Curry.